Hi everyone, I'm Nguyen. Thank you. Let's give it a round for Nguyen. They're making me all tender as I start my presentation, and that's a good thing. So I'm going to go through the presentation and then we'll screen my film. I'll talk a little bit about it and then we'll have time for questions for both Nguyen and I. And then we'll have an activity. So stay to the end, we're going to get to create together. So first off, Catherine asked me to talk a little bit about all the things I do, and I struggled with that a lot. So then I figured I can ground it in some of the websites that I make. So this is my academic website. It's my historical one. It's the one that I put on my CV when I'm applying to jobs in history. And I'm a historian. I was trained as a historian. I'm teaching history at Brown. And I love my work. It's incredibly difficult. It's challenging. I researched the histories of the colonial library during the French colonial period in Vietnam. And it provides me this space to think about the past and how people access knowledge and come to read and understand the world in the 1920s to 1950s, specifically in Vietnam. And I love it. It's challenging. Being a historian helps me to be a more critical and compassionate person. However, at times, being a capital H historian feels really authoritative and way too final, where there's a push, and I sometimes push this upon my students too, to ask them about their intervention. What is this? What's the argument? And to be final and clear and precise in the language that we use. Even though history shouldn't be authoritative, it's actually quite interpretive, creative, and artistic, but performatively, and the profession pushes us to take on this distancing. And for me, it felt like a discombobulated, out-of-body experience every time I talk about my historical work. I felt like I had to kind of float above my body and say like, okay, I had to assume this authoritative character, and it brought me so far from why I studied history in the first place, which was to understand my family. I was raised on stories of war-torn Vietnam. I was born in a refugee camp in Pulau Bidau in Malaysia, and that's how I came to history, to a yearning to connect with this place that was both very familiar and at the same time very foreign, changing and dynamic, and also not quite the Vietnam that exists in my family's memory, and what I was taught was very different than the Vietnam that I was encountering in the media, in what I was learning through history and Southeast Asian studies. And for me, it felt like this jumble of understandings. So in practice, I pendulum swing from this intense historic inquiry where it's about the pursuit of knowledge and challenging and understanding Southeast Asian studies within a more interpretive, critical lens, and the complete surrender to uncertainty, nuance, and ambiguity that is my arts website. And I have to say, thank you for this opportunity. Again, Catherine and EMR to have me here, because I've never been able to share both identities in one space at Harvard. It just feels really nice to be one person instead of two discombobulated people, where I could talk about my historical work but not talk about my feminist performance art, and hesitate when this is the splash page to my arts website. But so I love. And then Eric, my partner, who's photographing right here, is an artist as well. And we work together, and we're human. And I love that aspect of arts. And Eric asked me, like, oh, maybe you should talk about how you became a poet. And I'm just like, I think we're all kind of poets, but certain K-12 education forces us into these neat categories, and the professionalization also kind of forces us to be legible in a certain way. So I really see arts as a playful way of engaging with many of the issues that I come up with in my scholarship, from classification and kind of access to information, and kind of even this came out from reading. I think I was reading science and technology studies about classifying bodies, and I was just like, I just feel I need to translate all this theory into a different form. And I think at this point I was also working in Vietnam in the archives, which also has like a certain, like the archives in Vietnam is often staffed primarily by women and who are, have a certain relationship to their job. Most of them don't really want to be there, but it's like there's this social, beautiful bonding that happens between the women, but also I'm there to do my work, so please help me do my work. So there's just like a lot of intensity that happens in the archives, and I wrote this. So for me, I embrace the ways in which poetic form allows me to explore and also to kind of do things with my hands too. So I studied the history of bookmaking, and for me it was, or it's the history of the book and libraries, and for me it was hard to kind of abstractly study that. So then I was just like, okay, I will like kind of make a chapbook, and I'm in the process of making a dummy book, and I learned how to like line with cut print because I was like, I don't abstractly understand how printmaking works, so let's just start doing it. So I pretty much embrace every type of media and form that makes sense to me and is curious and allows me to explore. And ultimately, I find all these, I find history, I find all these as different ways of creative interpretation and understanding the world. So my scholarship feeds my art, and it allows me to draw out my personal history, but also allows me to be one person. And as much as I like to pretend and isolate my various identities, I'm just like, I'm still one person, and I'm coming to terms with that. I might have various online personas, but I still am one person. And I am committed to understanding the past, and whatever media or form that takes, I embrace it. I'm interested at the moment in ways of understanding the past, myself, words and feelings, but also how those words and feelings are inscribed within our own bodies, the language we use, the memories we hold, and the histories we tell. So I just wanted to kind of preface that a little bit because I wanted to just show my film that I made and not to explain it too much. It's only a 9-minute film, and then afterwards I'll talk a little bit more about the film.
Mẹ đã trải qua nhiều khó khăn, con phải chịu khó thì sẽ thành công. My mother's words play back like a scratchy recording.
Gia đình phải hy sinh cho nhau.
Quiet, muffled, persistent.
Con phải chịu khó thì sẽ thành công.
Faded notes in the soundtrack of my childhood memories. The words are scrambled. Meanings associate with memory. Hastily connected synapses between Vietnamese and English, past and present.
Salad với cá đúng không? Với cả trứng cá đó. Có cái trứng cá.
Maybe she used to always say,
Cố gắng lên,
try harder, work hard, but my memory fails to catalog her precise words. Instead, I hold on to her stories. Childhood,
khi còn nhỏ.
khi còn nhỏ. Worried wide eyes search for her words.
Hy sinh,
Hands flail through the Vietnamese words, grasp clumsily for meaning,
khó khăn.
yet catch only her tone, her tears, her distant stare. Throughout my youth, her life served as a
Tấm gương.
a mirror, a model of work, struggle, and triumph. I listened attentively to stories of her lost childhood in post-war communist Vietnam, her young motherhood escaping into the night with her children, her unforgettable boat journey, and my miracle birth in the Malaysian refugee camp. Stories shared in the darkest of nights between only my mother and me as we lay under the patchwork blanket of my Vietnamese comprehension ability. She used a certain vocabulary to tell her stories.
Hy sinh,
Khó khăn, chịu khó. I did not understand their precise meaning, but became familiar with their sounds. Whispers of the past professed through stories of struggle and sacrifice.
khó khăn.
Hy sinh, khó khăn, chịu khó. The words were fragmented totems, heavy with the metaphysics of meaning, and untranslatable into the American English of my suburban childhood realities. I held the totems in my hand, ran my fingers along their textures, and carefully placed them in my treasure chest. The words represented my mother's life. Each word embodied tales of world past, dreams lost, the impossible overcome. But every so often, the words forcibly made their way into bouts of resentment and mistranslated arguments. Your parents sinned for your life in America. You do not know what Kalkan is. We have to call every day to provide for you. Over the years, the totemic words became increasingly distant and indistinguishable. Their universe of meanings collapsed into each other, a nebulous cloud of hazy interpretation. Adulthood, bây giờ. Chớp mắt tỉnh dậy, một tay nắm chặt không buông ra, một tay thêu một hình ảnh mới trên tranh. Phải giữ lại mỗi từ, mỗi câu, mỗi ý không hiểu rõ. Tự học, tự biết, tự hiểu. I reopen the chest, lift out the lexical totems lightly covered with a dusty sheet of forced forgiving, sacrifice, suffering, perseverance, I think. I fumble with the words, utter their sounds between my untrained lips, and feel the soft sonic warmth hover around my ears. Heroic nostalgia seep past the temporal and linguistic distance of miscomprehension. I try out the words in context, the way she used to, or at least the way I remember she used to. Family must hasten for each other. Mother has experienced so much Kalkan. You must call in order to be successful. Through the looking glass, call nhìn lại. Tra từ điển tìm lại những từ mất đi quên rồi. Có phải là đây không? Hay là cái này? Mình cất đi hay để quên ở đâu rồi? An examination glass of logic, dictionaries, distance, peering to blurry memories. Kalkan, I think I know you now. As an adjectival specter, call you haunted all things difficult. School was call, work was call. But as a noun Kalkan, you are an undeniable force. On the surface, it means difficulty, but in context implies the crushing weight of suffering. Kalkan was how my mother operated. Kalkan was the relentless heavy fog on her past, her present, her future. Kalkan, the only constant in life, and Call, the only antidote. Call, you are both everywhere and nowhere, hiding in context and unspoken subtleties. I regretfully have come to know you. As a verb of action with inaction, Ju commanded quiet strength and patience. Somewhere between endure, concede, and tolerate, I found its meaning intolerable. Ju conjured immediate obedience. Thôi, dáng chịu đi con, was a regular command for the kids to no longer be kids. Translated and meant something along the lines of, exasperated sigh, my child, you must understand and accept our current circumstances, because there is no other choice. Together, Call literally carried the heavy meaning, endure suffering, withstand difficulty, accept hard times. A state of becoming, the realization of wisdom. Tay phải cầm gì vậy? Cho con xem đi. What are you holding in your hand, mother? Let me see, please.
Đây là cả một đời công lao của mẹ. Một nắm hy sinh, 2 nắm khó khăn, 3 nắm chịu khó. Con đếm lại đi, con có đủ để mua thành công cho con chưa? Con đếm lại đi.
This is a lifetime of my labor. 1 handful of sacrifice, 2 handfuls of suffering, 3 handfuls of perseverance. My child, do you count this for me again? Is this enough to purchase success for you? Han is a state of becoming, a transformation, the realization of something we all seek. Gum means work. It is a lifetime of your labor, your hands, your sacrifices. Tan plus gum means the realization of your labor, or in other words, success. I hold the totems one by one in my hands. He sin, ka kan, jiu ka. Their edges are worn, their spirits tired. My hands automatically reach for all of them at once, but the words refuse to stay in my grasp.
My mother word lay back like a scratchy body, quiet, muffled.
I close my eyes and echo that exasperated sigh I hear so often. Thôi, con đừng lo, mẹ lo cho. Her resounding voice slips between the totemic words in a blanket embrace, cradling my hands, delicately shielding each word, meaning, memory.
Bài thơ nói về cái gì?
Về ngôn ngữ, về trí nhớ, không phải trí nhớ nhưng mà về quá khứ mà mình nhớ lại mình
Vẽ.
phải nói về di tán những cái gì mà mình nhớ lại á, rồi mình đặt một ý nghĩa khác, mình làm nên một ý nghĩa khác, mình phân tích một cách khác.
I made this film kind of accidentally. We were living in Vietnam at the time, and I think we were in Saigon, and Eric was like, he loves to learn languages too, so we were just talking about languages, and he was like, let's work for success in Vietnamese, and then that's where it started. We were just having a conversation about success, and I was like, oh, it's time to go, but I'm like, yeah, success is kind of like, what does it really mean? And then I was like, okay, let's break it down. And then because Eric's Korean American and I'm Vietnamese, and some of these words have Sino-Vietnamese roots too, so then we also like linguistically are trying to find connections and bridges across. So like gum, like we talk about like work and labor, and then tan is this, like I think of it as transformation or a state of becoming. And after that, I started to think more about kind of the fragmented ways in which we come to learn a language. And for me, I wanted to write about that fragmentation. So the film had its life in a conversation, and then also had a previous life as an essay. So I wrote the essay as like this embodiment of trying to think about my relationship to the words, specific words that were associated with my mother, and how so much of Vietnamese language learning for me was tied to specific moments. So I was born in a refugee camp, and then my language of communication expression was Vietnamese. So I was in ESL in the US in school, but then it slowly transformed. My language expression became English pretty early on, like around age 7 or 8. And now, as a scholar of Vietnam, I then like officially learned Vietnamese, like from college up into graduate work, and the Vietnamese I'm learning is so different than the language that I was raised on, right? Because language changes. Like one story I'd have is like, I would be talking to my uncle, and then I would say like, oh, I went to the Gong Vien, which is park. But then he's like, that's not a Vietnamese word. And then I was like, oh, I think it is. And then he's like, no, it's park. Because that's tied to a specific moment of like Southern Vietnamese who who grew up in, who basically were influenced by the French word for park, and then used the word park, and then that was brought over to diasporic diasporic Vietnamese in California. So who owns the language is it always comes up in my family as we're talking. So I'm speaking both contemporary Vietnamese, older Vietnamese, and then I wanted to essentially write about. Did you signal me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you. That's okay. I wanted to write about that relationship to words, and even as I was learning Vietnamese, it's so much of a relational language. So for me, like, I had only existed in Vietnamese as a child. As the relational pronoun, I was essentially child. And as I was growing up, then I became like Ji, which is older sister, or Thầy Giáo, which is professor, but really some just call me Go Zhao because it's gendered, that's a different issue. And then I'm realizing that I'm embodying all these different forms of and relationships as I'm aging, as the language is transforming, as my relationship to my mother is transforming, and she sees me as an adult, hopefully. And then so I wrote this piece, and I actually have a few copies if anyone's interested in copy. I can share it later to read the transcript. And I really wanted to make something that embodies that relationship. And then I made the thing, and then wrote the essay. And how I got into filmmaking is kind of accidental too. I just, like I said, I embrace every form of media and expression. And the backstory is we were traveling in Portugal, so that's why there's this beautiful apartment. But then I was just like, I've got to do this. So I made the film in a day, and then I edited, and Eric did the video work, and I edited, did the sound mixing and whatnot. And then, for those who make film, I used about 90% of the footage, which is really rare for films, just because like it's so scrappy. Because I was just like, I gotta do this, and I have to do it now because my mom's gonna leave, and I don't know. I feel a sense of urgency, especially with working with family projects. And then afterwards, like another iteration of this film, we started to do more translations together, and I found like how powerful it was to translate these words with her. And then I started to do a mental health project, so then I started to translate mental health words with her, and then we started to do this bilingual translation thing. I was also with Eric's mother, who's Korean, so we started translating to Korean, and it just really like brought these worlds together in such an empowering way. This film I see as part of a larger project called Nat Translated, Nat means mother, and it's kind of a dummy book of like experimental, like a handmade book of poems and essays, but I also want it to be this multimedia website, which if you go on my website, Miss Reading, you can see the Nat Translated project. But I just wanted to do something that really embraced non-linear, non-dominant narrative. So even like as I was making the film, and I screened it at a film fest, and others, I've shared it with others outside the Vietnamese community, I was really struck at like what to translate and what not to translate. And what I wanted to do through the film was I wanted to be both kind of pedagogical, because I'm a teacher at heart, and I think a lot about how my mother transferred these lessons about khó khăn, chịu khó, thành công, success, perseverance, difficulty to me, but I also wanted people to understand those words in a not just through direct translation of those words that I quickly translated, but through like her tenderness, her actions, what's not spoken. And then I also wanted people to experience, those who don't know Vietnamese, to experience what I felt as a kid, which was like, I don't really know what's going on. Like, I don't know what's happening. Like, when the adults are talking, adults are like disciplining me, I think, because the tone sounds really negative. And then I'm just like, and a lot of it is just about room feel, right? Like how we feel about a moment. And that's how translation is happening, is the tone and the tenderness. Like, I knew I was in trouble when she used like "con nhà ai," like saying like all these other words where I didn't quite know how to explain it in the language of expression, which is not English. So I wanted to like create something that embodied that. And then I realized with text, I love the text that it originated in, and then it was published in a few places. But then I also wanted to like show the tenderness between me and my mother. And if you just read the words, it feels actually quite heavy. And reads like this kind of resentful or maybe like difficult, weighty, guilt-ridden experience. But then I think I'm at a point in my life that's transforming, and part of that is because my worlds are coming together with my scholarship and professional work. Like my loved ones are transforming, so I wanted to kind of cherish that special relationship I have with my mother. And then I just want to conclude with a funny story as a way of conclusion. That kind of like, I've been thinking a lot about translation as power, healing, and gratitude. And it's a story because I just finished my PhD, and it was really symbolic for my family to, since my mother never graduated middle school because of the war, and I realized too that the language that I was speaking with her, the Vietnamese I was speaking with her, was very much of a reflection of her education. So like the Vietnamese I'm learning now is very much like technical Vietnamese, more complex forms of expression. But then like we talk, and it has this beautiful connection because she's my mom. But I wanted to share the story where at my PhD, I basically took my mom to one of these like fancy PhD events, of which all the graduating PhDs were attending with their advisors. And then so I took her to this event, and the whole time it was the first time I felt like my world's coming together, and like the whole time I'm like translating to my mom. It's like, oh, this is a fancy person who like is a scholar of Japan who doesn't change the field, whatever. And she's like, she looks funny, like, it's like that's the conversation that's happening at the side. And then like I'm politely introducing other people, and I'm translating for her and explaining things. It was the first time I was put like in the body of an interpreter / translator, and it was really hard. I felt very overwhelmed with what to translate, what not to translate. And part of this event, there was kind of like a little ritual where all the advisors kind of toast the PhDs who are graduating. So my advisor toasted me, and he said, I wrote this down, so yeah. So he said, out of all the 25 years of his teaching, Cindy was the only student, or one of the few students, to send in complete chapters while still in the field. So I was like, oh, that's very nice. And then after the event, I went and talked to my mom, and I was just like, Mom, was there anything that, like, from the toast that you didn't understand that you wanted me to translate? And then she's like, no, I understood perfectly. He said, out of all my students in 25 years, you are the best. And I was just like, Mom, I love you so much. and there's something in that moment where it's just like, like that she was able to grasp onto sentiment and feel, and also like channel her own filter of what's happening. And I love that, through translation we can imbue our own personalities, our own narratives into what we say and how we connect with others. Thank you very much. Now we can transition into questions about maybe 5 to 10 minutes for questions for both of us, and then and I really believe conversation is a creative act, so I feel like very special about having all of you here. So like, please just feel free to ask us anything. I'm going to speak for the both of us, but feel free to ask us anything. So we're going to do like 5 to 10 minutes of questions, and then we're going to transition into a fun translation activity afterwards. So,